Good morning. My name is Mark Ruff, R-U-F-F. I am the city coordinator here at the City of Minneapolis. I've been the city coordinator since March. Previous to that, for 4 years, I was the city's chief financial officer. Thank you for being here to hear the message that we're going to bring this morning from a city staff perspective. And the message is multi-layered. One component of this message is to our residents and to our businesses in the City of Minneapolis. We as staff know that we have lost some of your trust in the actions over the last 3 weeks, that we have not met your expectations in terms of response, that we have seen parts of our city that have been, frankly, impacted that will take years to recover from. The second message I want to deliver is around reassurance, which is you have an incredibly dedicated group of leaders and people on the ground every day bringing services to you as we have for a long period of time. And you can rely on those services day in and day out, that we will be here shoulder to shoulder with you to bring a better future for our city as soon as possible. That is not something we as a city can do ourselves. We need all of you as partners, and those are individuals, those are institutions, whether it be the county, the state, the University of Minnesota, our school district, the Park and Recreation Board, our nonprofit partners and our for-profit partners. We need to stand together. The third message is to our Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, is also a full recognition that where we are today is a result of structural racism within every institution, but in particular the City of Minneapolis. And that this is not just about, as our Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins says, cleaning one house of a particular department within the city. It is cleaning the house of every department in our city. And those that stand before you this morning are some of the leaders that are within the city, but not all of the leaders as staff. We have exceptional leaders within the City of Minneapolis who are members of our Black community, who are people born in countries other than the United States who have come here with a choice to make this a better place. You will hear those voices in future events like this, where we will be briefing you on what's happening day to day, week to week within the city, to again bring us to a better place as a city. But I also stand here as a white leader within the City of Minneapolis with a full acknowledgement that our responsibility as white leaders is equal to, if not more important, than the reliance on our people of color leaders to bring messages forward in terms of the need to change. We as white leaders need to move past the defensiveness, or in the words of Robin DiAngelo, our white fragility, into a place where we can have real conversations and real actions. The stage has been set for a while by our city elected officials. We are centered around a strategic racial equity action plan that was adopted by this council and this mayor at the beginning of their term. It is that we have not lived up to the ideals and brought action to a place where it needs to be. And we will, again, with our partners, move and make real progress to that. That is a commitment on the part of we as city leaders. Beyond that, we are fully aware of the multiple crises we have been dealing with. And you will hear about the city's response from a staff level to the COVID-19 response, about the COVID-19 crisis. You will hear what we are doing in terms of the physical recovery efforts and the work we are doing with our partners, again at the state, around the issues that are incumbent upon us to help businesses recover, and not just people who own property, but people who occupy those businesses, people impacted on the ground, and also the underlying housing crisis that is associated with the economic outfall of the COVID-19 economic crisis in its own that we as a city are keenly aware of. But I do want to bring us back to the structural racism issues that underlie this last 3 weeks, and to assure you that not only externally for our communities of color, for our individuals and our groups who feel deeply affected, because I think we are all, as leaders, tired. We have spent not just the last 3 weeks, but the last 3 months working 10 to 12-hour days. But we are keenly aware of those who work within the city and outside the city who say, we are tired from 30 years of living with structural racism. We are tired of being the ones to carry forward the message. So I just want to assure all of you that we as city staff, following the values of not only our elected officials but our community, will make that a major value and action point within any recovery effort associated with this. I also want to reassure you that our basic systems have functioned and will function. When you call 911, you should expect an answer. That is not to say that we were not overwhelmed for a period of days. We certainly were, like many other systems, but that system has functioned. Our 911 call answering and dispatchers folks are on the job 24 hours a day. Our fire department is fully operational. And I also want to emphasize that when you call 911 and have an immediate need for public safety response, that our Minneapolis Police Department still is at the ready for responding to those immediate public safety needs. I recognize that many people are hesitant to call 911 for a police response and may want to take security issues into their own hands. Our encouragement is to rely on reliable, licensed options for security, peace officers, private security, and not to take security into your own hands. That can have detrimental effects unto its own. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to other leaders within the city to talk through specific recovery efforts as well as the other COVID issues that we had described. And certainly we're happy to stand for questions afterwards. With that, I'll ask Eric Hansen from our Community Planning and Economic Development Department to come forward.
Good morning, my name is Eric Hansen. I'm the Director of Economic Policy and Development for the City of Minneapolis. It's E-R-I-K, H-A-N-S-E-N is my name, spelled. And before I get started, I have seasonal allergies, so if I'm clearing my throat or coughing a little bit, that's what it's from. As I'll speak on behalf of the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development. We have the Housing Director and the Development Services Director will also give some comments. But today, as we start this conversation, over 100,000 people in Minneapolis are drawing unemployment benefits. And out of those, it disproportionately impacts those younger and black and without more than a high school degree. The outcomes of our structural racism system is evident in every aspect of the economy and the output. The events that have occurred over the last few weeks just exacerbated what's happened over the last few months with COVID and over the history of the city since its starting in 1867. We as a city are working as closely as we can across our divisions to figure out what, in fact, is the damage. And we've gotten some advice from community around damage versus impact. Damage is something we can quantify. It's going to take a long time to quantify that figure. But impact is across the board. And it's disproportionately impacted neighborhoods that were already suffering from displacement pressures and economic downturns. In some of our neighborhoods, when stronger neighborhoods, more economically diverse neighborhoods get a cold, they get the flu. And we're in the middle of a pandemic. So the events that occurred after the killing of George Floyd have not started on May 25th. They started a long time ago. So it's going to take a long time for us to get a number. You'll see some projections, and that's what they are, projections come out of the city about what we believe are the damages. We will be working with our Office of Emergency Management to come up with figures that we'll need through the FEMA process and working with the state. We're working with the legislature and the governor's office around resources that we can bring to bear. But don't expect that we will have answers and solutions quickly. If we continue down this road and continue to use the decision-making processes that we have in place, it will disproportionately forget the voices of those Black and brown communities that have not been at the table historically. So you'll see the city asking for as many resources as we can, with as few strings, with as little requirements on those funds as possible, so that we can work with community about the outcomes. So you'll be seeing that process come through. In the meantime, there are resources available for those that are impacted by these few months. I will start with our career force system. The state, through Minnesota Works and our career force system, working with the state of Minnesota, Hennepin County, and the city's workforce board, has resources available for those that have lost employment either through COVID or through the events of the last few weeks. There are resources there that I'd like you to take advantage of. The city's technical assistance program, the Business Technical Assistance Program, has community-based organizations that are ready for businesses to call on them for advice. And for those that are interested in impacts to businesses, I would like to bring up Steve Poore, or to properties, I'd like to bring up Steve Poore, who can talk about what to do for damages. Steve.
Good morning. My name is Steve Poore, P-O-O-R. I'm Director of Development Services within the Community Planning and Economic Development Department. Our group was tasked with going out and looking at the damage after the events from May 25th. What we did immediately was deploy staff out onto Lake Street, West Broadway, and we're trying to identify buildings that have been catastrophically damaged. That's important because these are properties that could fail and then injure citizens, people around on the right-of-way or nearby. We identified more than a dozen properties, and we took action to make sure those properties were demolished safely and in a very expedited, timely way. We then went on and looked at other properties that had substantial damage and had to make determinations as to whether they were going to fail and cause public safety issues, or were they more or less stable and that we could put those kind of at a second tier to address. We completed most of that work within 2 days. It was painful to go out there and walk the streets. It was an odd juxtaposition in that early that week the streets were very clean of debris and litter, but for these large piles of debris from the damaged buildings. And we all feel the pain going through that community, and it affected staff deeply, but we're committed to helping rebuild. So part of that effort then leading later in the week was we got city staff together and did a complete citywide survey of every street in Minneapolis to inventory damage. We had to do some work on sorting out what was damaged from some events and what was maybe preventive boarding of buildings. Many of those properties, or all of those properties, pardon me, are reflected on the map behind me. They have different levels of damage. This work was partly what came up with the $55 million number that we're working with governmental units to receive aid. The 4 broad categories of damage were affected, which was cosmetic damage to the roofs or siding, damage to landscape and trees, but with no impact to access onto the property. The second category was minor. Minor damage often could be uninhabitable structures, damage to the mechanical systems and the HVAC units, but there was no substantial structural damage to the property. So the property was not in danger of failing or collapsing. The next category was major. Major damage, again, included properties that were uninhabitable, but they had minor failures of structural elements on the walls, foundation damage, or displacement. These properties were identified as not being safe, but were, again, not in a category that needed to be demolished immediately. The fourth category was destroyed. And sadly, we've all seen the pictures of the properties that were destroyed and devastated. Some of those properties did have remaining elements that did need to be addressed immediately, whether they were walls that were going to collapse onto the right-of-way, even if they didn't have a roof. Some had partial roofs, but they were going to collapse. Most of these properties were immediately adjacent to the public sidewalk or a street or an alley. And so again, that category was immediately addressed, and working with our partners in the construction industry, we had, again, more than a dozen properties demolished. Within those properties, though, there were several storefronts. So a property could have had several storefronts and businesses within it, residences above it. And so while the number may be not a very large number, understand the impacts of that are very great. We will continue to work with county, state officials to follow up on the findings, and we will continue to work with property owners. So what are we doing with property owners? We've tried to get the message out early on that property owners can go onto their property if they do certain things first. And the first thing they should do is contact their insurance company. They need to call the insurance company, let them know what's happened, follow the directions of your particular insurance company about the protocols to deal with these types of situations. Often an insurance agent would come out and may size up the situation and bring additional resources, whether it's their own engineer or some other type of specialist to look at the damage. The other thing that's important to do is don't take for granted that the utilities have been cut. One of the challenges we had in the first week was trying to make sure that gas service had been cut off to properties that had been damaged, to make sure that properties that weren't damaged but had their gas service discontinued because a gas main had to be shut down for a period of time. So we worked hard with our inspectors and CenterPoint to get those buildings back online with gas service. The other utility is important to check with is the electrical service. We don't need a line dangling in a puddle of water and somebody steps in it and now we've got a tragic situation there. There's also going to be a high likelihood that in some properties there may be contaminated debris. Many of these structures are quite old. Some may or may not have asbestos or other potential carcinogens or just bad chemicals on the site. And so again, it's important to check the site before they go onto it. And as we've mentioned here, while a property may have substantial damage and may not be structurally unsound, that doesn't mean that there aren't loose headers, bricks, bad floorboards, things of this nature, rough debris that could injure somebody going onto a property. So the message again is if you're a property owner and you haven't done so, call your insurance company. Make sure you start that process. If for any reason you don't have insurance but you still want to go onto the property, follow the guidelines that we've given you about making sure the property is safe to go onto it. As we move forward and folks come in to try to stabilize their properties and rebuild their properties, we will face the challenge of operating in the COVID era. So for those of you who may not be aware, our public service center has been shut down to open to the public for several weeks. We're following the public health guidelines about gathering, and so it will be maybe an added challenge for some of our folks trying to rebuild to access our services. We recognize there's a very high demand on 311 call services and others, so beginning this week we'll have a dedicated phone line that folks can call in that will get you to the zoning office. The zoning office, for those who aren't familiar, is what regulates the land use. And so people want to know, can I rebuild? Can I build bigger? What is the process to rebuild? And the first call to get that information, particularly for small business owners, is to call the zoning office. We will have a phone number that will take messages and will turn calls within a couple hours to folks. Gives us a chance to look up their address, do a little research, and that will be posted on the website most likely tomorrow. It'll be on the city's website. This again is primarily intended to help the small business owners that were drastically affected by the damage to their properties. And of course, this comes on the challenges of many of them not being open during the period of stay at home. So with that, I guess I will turn it over to Andrea Brennan, our housing director, and I'll be available for questions after the presentation.
Thank you. I'm Andrea Brennan, Director of Housing Policy and Development in the Community Planning and Economic Development Department. My name is spelled Andrea, A-N-D-R-E-A, Brennan, B-R-E-N-N-A-N. As Mr. Ruff mentioned earlier, the city was already facing a housing crisis before COVID came along. And the housing crisis, meaning for folks who are cost burdened, meaning that they're paying more than they can afford for rent, or facing eviction, or are experiencing homelessness. So people in our city that are experiencing this housing crisis most directly are disproportionately Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrant communities. So one of the things that we're doing is to continue to work and double down on investment in producing and preserving affordable housing. And we are hoping to produce or preserve, close on the financing along with many of our partners, another 1,000 units this year. Related specifically to the last few weeks, there were 3 affordable multifamily developments that had city financing in them that were damaged. One of them was completely destroyed. That one was in the Lake Hiawatha area, and it had not quite finished construction, so it was unoccupied at the time it was destroyed. There were 2 other properties that sustained damage, but they will be repaired, and no one was displaced as a result of that. There were 35 households who were displaced from their homes due to fire and damage. Those 35 households were served by the Red Cross at the request of the city to set up a temporary shelter in hotel. And so those households were sheltered in a hotel. The city has made a request of the county, Human Services Group and team, to help assist those households to find new housing. So as of now, 21 are able to or were able to return to their homes after repairs have been made. 9 have been assisted and found new homes, and there are 5 households that we're still working with the county and trying to assist them to find new homes. In late May, this is an update on persons experiencing unsheltered homelessness in our city. In late May, a group of private volunteers secured a hotel rooms at the Midtown Sheraton for persons experiencing unsheltered homelessness. Last week, the private owner of the hotel informed the folks that were staying there that they had to leave. After several days, when some people refused to leave, the city was called in to help evacuate the remaining residents and help secure the site. Many of the unsheltered individuals who were residing at the Sheraton Hotel are now at a growing encampment in Powderhorn Park. The city is working proactively with the Park and Rec Board, the county, the state, and outreach providers to determine next steps for this encampment site, but also more broadly a strategy to assist and serve persons experiencing unsheltered homelessness in our city. In the near term, the city The City Health Department will be on site to do public health assessment, and the Park and Rec Board is working with the city's assistance to provide sanitation and other services to residents who are there now. And Commissioner Musicant is here and will speak a little bit more to the city's role in providing services to persons at encampments. So I think that's all I have. I think Rebecca Malmquist is next.
Good morning. I'm Rebecca Malmquist, Director of Assessments for the City Assessor's Office. I'm here to talk to you about the disaster reassessment for property tax relief that we are working on. Minnesota Statute 273-1232 requires all damaged property in a disaster area or emergency area be reassessed. This is done to capture how much damage was caused from the disaster by comparing the reassessed post-disaster value with the previous market value. In this case, the previous market value is the January 2nd, 2020 estimated market value. Statute identifies the assessor as the responsible party for the reassessment. We are here to assist, provide information, and answer questions to ensure that all property owners who are eligible to apply do apply to receive this relief. We're working closely with our partners at Hennepin County and the Department of Revenue as we apply statute to damage received during recent civil unrest that was originally written for damage obtained in natural disasters, such as a tornado or flooding. On May 28, 2020, the mayor signed the mayoral declaration of local emergency for civil disturbance. This is the first step in the process for the city to be declared a disaster or emergency area. For property owners, for the property taxes of owners whose property has been damaged or destroyed by arson or vandalism by someone other than the property owner may qualify for a property tax abatement and or credit for a portion of the taxes payable in 2020 and 2021. Our office is in the process of sending notification via U.S. mail to all properties that have been identified as receiving any kind of property damage during recent civil unrest. And that is the work that Steve was referencing. At this time, there are 784 parcels identified. This is the parcel level data, not business data or building data. As we know, there could be multiple buildings and businesses on one parcel. If property owners that sustain damage have not heard from our office, been contacted by our office by June 26th, they should call 612-673-5959. This number is dedicated to disaster reassessment. Appraisers in the assessor's office will review the damage collected and will determine the percent of damage. This is used to calculate the reassessed value. For properties that sustained 50% or more damage and qualify for an abatement or credit, an application is required, and the assessor's office will assist and provide these applications to property owners. While the timeline for this work has not been finalized, we expect to conduct the property reviews, collect applications, and calculate the reassessed values between June and August. By September 1, this work should be complete, and the results will be sent to the Hennepin County Auditor's Office, who calculates the new tax amounts. We will then work with city and county leadership to complete the application and supporting documents to be sent to the state, requesting property tax relief in the form of reimbursement to the local taxing jurisdictions. This is due on November 1st. We know that there are bills being introduced by both the House and Senate during this special session. We are monitoring these, and because we know they may impact the work being done right now on the disaster reassessment, current and future market values, and property taxes. Again, we're here to provide information and walk property owners through what can be a very confusing process so that they can receive the property tax relief that they deserve. Thank you, and I'll be passing it off to Robin Hutchison, Director of Public Works. Yes, thank you. Rebecca, Rebecca, last name Malmquist, Malmquist. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Robin Hutchison, ROBIN, I'm the Director of Public Works for the City of Minneapolis. In times of crisis and every single day, our job in Public Works is to ensure that basic city services continue to function for all residents and all businesses. Certainly in COVID, our first crisis, we reconfigured our field work so that all 830 of our field operating crews could continue to deliver safe drinking water, make sure our sewer system was functioning, pick up solid waste, recycling, and we continue to do that. Over the past few weeks, we have also ensured that our basic city services have been met and exceeded. A few activities related to this most recent recovery effort. The first and foremost is our immediate response to recovery, which happened every single day we saw damage to our city. Our crews began often before 6 a.m. to clean up debris, glass, obstructions in the right-of-way, burned cars, everything that we needed to clean up for that day. Our crews went out and worked sometimes a 20-hour day to literally pick up the pieces of our community. And I want to thank every single person who came out and did that in partnership with us. Our efforts were only successful because we had, I want to say, thousands of people helping their neighbors and helping us in partnership to clean our city. We removed 115 tons of garbage from street corners that volunteers placed for us to pick up, 10 tons of recycling, and 14 tons of debris from demolition that had landed in the right-of-way. Our solid waste crews continue to collect from sponsors events and are performing graffiti abatement. And that particular crew has maintained the high standard of solid waste and recycling pickup that our residents come to rely on as a source of stability as a basic city service. We've documented the damage to our infrastructure. Many items needed immediate repair, such as melted traffic signal heads, street lights that were damaged, over 1,000 city signs, and we, due to scorched pavement and other substandard conditions, will need to restripe 4 different streets. We continue to support our community in the many ways that we are needed, and we will, as our primary function in Public Works, continue to provide our basic city services every single day and through any crisis the city is experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. My name is Gretchen Musicant, Gretchen Musicant. I'm the Commissioner of Health for the City of Minneapolis. And as previous speakers have laid out for you, we are really dealing with the COVID pandemic, which I'm thinking of as a marathon, something that we will deal with in various stages from now until when there is vaccine, which could be quite a while from now, and the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd and the unrest that followed that. And so our challenge has been to act with immediacy within this marathon. So as the governor has dialed back some of the restrictions on activity, we have worked to help the community respond to that opportunity and to do so safely. There have been additional testing opportunities that have been created both by the State Health Department and by us locally. We have conducted just this last week testing in the Cedars, which is a public housing authority building, and Riverside Plaza, able to test nearly 300 people between those sites. The State Health Department is running testing on Tuesdays and Wednesdays last week, this week, and next week, especially targeting those who have participated in many of the group activities. Last week, they were able to test 3,200 people between the 3 sites in Minneapolis and the 1 in St. Paul. The 3 sites in Minneapolis are Sabathani, Holy Trinity, and New Salem Baptist. We also have seen an expansion of the kinds of testing that are available through providers and are urging people to go to their providers if they have participated in any of the public activities, in addition to if they are feeling symptomatic or work in healthcare settings. We are also doing contact tracing within the Minneapolis Health Department. Early in the COVID outbreak, this was done exclusively by the State Health Department, but for the last month or so, we have also been doing it, contacting 30 cases a day, and so have contacted over 1,000 cases. We have trained up 23 investigators and are adding 15 more this week. We find that the people that we are contacting, about 43% of them speak a language other than English as their first language. This has been a time of great stress and has really stretched our mental well-being, I think, across the board, and we recognize this since the very beginning of the COVID outbreak. Our Office of Race and Equity used recast dollars to issue grants to treatment providers who are specifically geared towards helping the BIPOC community, and we have been directing people to those resources. We have also been on KMOJ, KALY, and KIXX talking about mental well-being, and are working with our Minneapolis Youth Congress to develop some videos around mental well-being for young people. Food insecurity has been exacerbated both by the COVID outbreak and the loss of jobs and the economic wherewithal to purchase food. And then the unrest, which caused disruption in the supply of normal ways that people get their food. And so we have been working with the city's Homegrown Minneapolis initiative and the Office of Emergency Management to help with community-led food distribution. We also are urging people to remember that the Minneapolis Public Schools does food distribution, free meal box for any student. They need not be enrolled in Minneapolis Public Schools, and so we urge families to remember to seek out that resource. We know that as we continue to be out and about a little bit more, that masks are very important, and we have an executive order from our mayor requiring masks to be used indoors. We have distributed over 60,000 masks to long-term care settings, to protesters, to community groups who want to distribute them broadly in our community. As Andrea mentioned, we have had a role in making sure that the health of persons who are without shelter are attended to, and so have provided sanitation resources for folks, both porta potties and hand washing stations, but also other tools that might help them stay safe as they are unsheltered. Finally, our health inspectors who work with our restaurants are out there intensively giving guidance to businesses so that they can reopen, helping them develop their required COVID preparedness plan, and to deal with some of the damage that might have occurred, and figuring out how to get back into business as quickly as possible. So that is some of our immediacy in the midst of this marathon. I believe that Greta is going to take over now.
Actually, what I will do is we'll just take a moment now to ask some questions. And if you could please direct your question to a particular speaker, or the appropriate speaker will step up. And also for speakers, for those at home, it would be good if you could maybe paraphrase or repeat the questions that those at home are sure to hear the question.
Director Rees-Kent, if I could, Commissioner Rees-Kent. My question for you has to do with, have we noticed through contact tracing or through the last rounds of testing that you've been doing, COVID cases like there being a correlation specifically with the protests that happened now more than a couple of weeks ago here in the city?
Thank you. The question has to do with, has there been a change in the prevalence of COVID after the aftermath of the unrest and the ways that people were together? I was really heartened by the amount of mask wearing there was out and about in the community. I think we really saw the establishment of a new community norm, if you will. So far, the testing that has been done and made available specifically for people who were involved in those activities has shown a positivity rate of about 1%. So a fairly low positivity rate so far. It may reflect who decided to come and have a test, but we have not seen an uptick. And as you might have noticed in the state, we see a significant decrease in the state, and we are seeing something a little milder but similar in Minneapolis as well.
Question for Robin Hutchison with Public Works. Can you give me a sense of, obviously the city is facing revenue shortfall, and there's already discussions about an amended budget for this year. Do you have a sense right now about how this is going to impact how you deliver services this year as well as 2021?
The question is about the 2020 budget and if Public Works, if I can anticipate any changes to service. We are underway with a 2020 adjustment and also preparing at the same time our 2021 budget proposal, so I don't have information for you today. We are a very basic city service. We understand that, and with the difficult decisions ahead, we will prioritize the needs of our residents and businesses first. There will be more information forthcoming. It is not yet available today.
Steve, four, please. Can I ask you a question? Maybe you're not the right person, I'm not sure, but is there a number of damaged in the umbrella category? I know you said cosmetic, minor, the four categories. Is there a big number that was how many all businesses? Was it hundreds, or do you have a number on how many in Minneapolis were damaged?
So the question is, do we have a number about the number of businesses that were damaged? Let me say, I think the number of structures, I believe it was 700. Yeah, it was 700. And emergency management will have more detailed information on the number. I'll defer to Director Hansen on the number of businesses that actually were damaged. But I would like to take this opportunity. One thing I failed to mention earlier, if businesses need to get a copy of their fire report for insurance purposes, they should call the Minneapolis Fire Department. So if they need a copy of the fire damage for their insurance, they should call the Minneapolis Fire Department to get a copy of that. I'll turn it over to Director Hansen.
I might have another one for you, Steve.
The detail you see in this map is about 700 businesses. They're not necessarily structures. That will blend all the way from people putting up boards to total destruction. And we're working through that categorization with our Office of Emergency Management. We did it first for the FEMA process, and now we're doing the next assessment. When we initially did some projections, we looked at 200 businesses, and this was, or 200 structures that were impacted after the first weekend, and so that number has grown, obviously. So we don't know the level of impact. It's going to take some time, but we'll continue to assess.
And what are you hearing? I know our first speaker talked about the frustrations and the message you wanted to get out to the business owners. Are you hearing? Are they kind of feeling lost? Like, are they getting the help they need?
Right. So this has been a very challenging time in the country, let alone in the city of Minneapolis. And what we've been hearing is a level of frustration that is expected after somebody's livelihood is taken away. And it's not only the impacts of COVID before that. So if we put the timeline, the governor reduced restrictions for opening of some of the businesses for food services on June 1st. That coincided with these events after the killing of George Floyd. So there's kind of a double whammy in some cases. But we've also heard from community, because now their source of food is gone, their hardware store is gone, their liquor store is gone, their employment is gone. So this is not just the structures that have been impacted, it's the community that's been impacted. And if you take a look at where the destruction happened, some of it is not because of the uprising, some of it is because people came into the community and tried to terrorize some neighborhoods and set buildings on fire. And so there's a lot of levels of frustration and anger, and they're all real, and we're working through it.
I have a question for Mr. Ruff. So, Mark, you know, you and other department heads are really mentioning all these sorts of crises that the city has had to deal with in the last couple of months, really, whether it's COVID, whether it's food shortage, whether it's homelessness, whether it's the unrest that happened following the death of George Floyd. I mean, what assessment would you give towards the city's response to sort of all of these things over the last couple of months, and what are things you feel that the city could have done better over the last couple of weeks that now you're sort of having to go back and address in a different way?
So the question was around how do we as city leaders feel about how the city's done through these multiple crises, and what do we feel like we could have done differently? I will speak to one immediate issue, which is why we're gathered here today, which is we could have communicated better over the last, not just several weeks, but several months. There is always, for us in the city of Minneapolis, a standard where we want to be 95% sure the information we're giving you is completely accurate. And until we have that certainty, we usually don't distribute information. In a time of crisis, that's not always possible, and sometimes the silence was worse than having information that was maybe 60 or 70 or 80% accurate. So if I were to look back on my own performance, not really looking back on the entire enterprise, but speaking only for myself, that would be one realistic criticism, and one of the reasons why I started out with an apology to both our residents and our businesses is hearing nothing is disturbing, and a sense that there is not a functioning level of government. The opposite is true, I will tell you, from the standpoint that when I mentioned not just the leaders that we have here in this room, but throughout the enterprise, it is an extremely strong group of people who have lived through other crises before, that working in the city of Minneapolis and being challenged is nothing new for us. It is just the speed at which the challenges have occurred. So do I feel like we made major mistakes along the way? No. Do I feel like we had people who were inexperienced and not addressing the issues the way they should have been? No. Do I feel like we have a long way to go to rebuild that trust? Yes. Am I committed to that process, and everyone in this room committed to that process? That's why we're here.
Just to kind of follow up on that question, I know during that first statement, you really talked about how you really want to focus on putting the issues of Black and brown residents in the city first. How can you go ahead and ensure that that is the case? I mean, none are here right now. How can you ensure that their voices will be heard and they're the ones that are helping make these decisions in the city?
The question was around how do we ensure that voices of Black and brown people are not only heard, but continue to be heard over the course of this process, this recovery process. I'll go back to what I said earlier about the vision and commitment of our city council and our mayor. They bring those voices to each one of us in this room on a daily basis. Each of us hears from our elected officials who are very close with their wards and with the overall city in bringing those messages to us as staff. Second is we have many, many staff who are deeply embedded within all of the institutions in the city, that grew up in the city, that live in the city. The third is the city has already, and I mentioned before, this is not a new process. We just need to double and triple down on our efforts, but the city has already made a commitment to our BIPOC communities in terms of the emphasis on renters' rights, in the terms of the emphasis on housing stability, as Andrea mentioned earlier, the concerns about what the economic impacts will be as the eviction order or prohibition is lifted, and what we as a city need to be doing, working not just ourselves, but again with partners to address all of the issues that oftentimes land within our geographic area as a city, but are really a cumulative effect of us as a region and a state.
I can follow up, can I follow up with that? When is that eviction, the prohibition, when does that end? Do you know?
So the question is, when's the eviction prohibition end? That is in the hands of the state government.
And you have fear about that? That a whole bunch of people might lose their house because they can't come up with the money?
I would not use the word fear. I would say there is a recognition of the impact and being prepared for that rather than just responding to it. And we are thinking about that issue on a daily basis within a variety of areas of our enterprise.
I have a question from Mr. Ford, that's right. Going back to sort of the projection of the damage, obviously there's still quite a bit of wreckage everywhere in certain properties. What is the sort of process that either businesses or if it's the city that's involved has to follow to sort of start removing all that wreckage and things like that? Is there a deadline for when that needs to be taken out?
So the question is there a deadline to have sites that were damaged cleared of debris? We are not in a particularly strong enforcement mode on this right now. So in other words, the first priority is the stability and safety of a site that's been damaged. We've kind of talked about the different levels of damage and what our response has been to that. I will say that we will continue to monitor properties to make sure they don't degrade and become a safety hazard. That's one piece. Most of the concern about debris, particularly around uses that may or may not have had food, is that we worry about infestations of rodents, things like that. Most of those sites have already been cleared. The city's role was really focused on the public infrastructure that Director of Public Works, Director Hutchinson, spoke to, getting debris out of the right-of-way, the sidewalks, the streets. On the private property, one of the challenges that you get into is, again, insurance companies want the policyholder to contact them. And while we've encouraged people to make your site safe and all that, we also want to work through their insurance company. We don't want them removing things that the insurance company may have said, well, we don't really understand what happened here or the level of damage you removed too much. I will say that we know that there has been ATF has come into several sites that were being cleaned up at different points in that cleanup or demolition and asked for that activity to refrain so that there could be further investigations. I believe that happened up at the AutoZone on Lake Street again, where I think ATF wanted to look at the foundation after much of the debris had been cleared. So we are going with a light hand, giving people time to get the resources and wherewithal to deal with these catastrophic issues on their property. We look at them if there's a safety issue. So again, our utilities cut. Is there anything that could endanger a person on the right-of-way? But short of that, we're really giving property owners time to get their resources together to deal with their own property. It is by and large a private matter. The city would get involved to it if, again, the property degrades to cause a public health issue, if there becomes some kind of pest infestation or other type of public health scenario that would endanger the public. So we're trying to work with folks and have a light hand on that right now.
I recognize we're 50 minutes in. I'm going to take one last question and then we'll have to wrap.
If I can follow up on that. I mean, so essentially you're saying there's no set timelines. I mean, can you tell the residents of the city of Minneapolis that a year from now they're going to be looking at a pile of rubble or a business dead, or 6 months from now or 6 weeks from now? I mean, is there any timelines you guys have at least in a crystal ball kind of fashion?
So the question is does the city have a timeline under which we would be telling property owners to clean up their properties? What my answer to that would be, the city is kind of looking how this plays out in the community. Again, people have been caught in a terrible situation. We don't the city doesn't have a good understanding of who has what wherewithal to deal with the problems. What we do is we look at the conditions of the property, we monitor the conditions of the property, and we focus on safety to the community. And so if the property is lying there, albeit with debris, if it's not causing a public health situation or exacerbating damage to an adjacent building, then I think this is not the time to put down hard deadlines when it needs to be cleaned up. We focus on public safety and public health. It is the case, though, as we move into different seasons, that there is an expectation that, you know, before we go into winter, these sites have been stabilized, which is a big important issue, and that the ground, if you will, has been taken care of. But this is not the time to have that discussion. That's not the discussion that we need to bring to bear on property owners. We need to be supportive of them. We need to give them time to deal with these issues. And we need to support them by letting them know if there is a public safety issue that could be a further encumbrance or liability to them. So right now is the time to work with people and monitor things.
I think there's one last question here.
Robin, you noted this, anybody can answer, but you noted in particular how like volunteers have really come across the entire city to help out, not just like helping clean up the streets, but, you know, putting up, you know, food pantries and also people helping out the residents at Powderhorn Park, for example, putting up plywood and all this protection. I mean, how do you feel in particular about all the volunteers around the city that have come together to help the city out? Is there anything in particular that you guys wanted to say about that?
The question is, how are we feeling about the volunteer efforts in so many areas of the city? I will start, but I will also ask my colleagues to contribute as well. As a director of a large department, I was in constant communication with my staff every day. And there was a day in particular when I joined a foreman in his truck, masks in the truck. And I wrote to my staff on that day that it is possible to be inspired even on the darkest day. And I felt that way because of the volunteers. I felt that way because of what I saw in the community. And I'll just say, and you don't have to put this on your cameras or anything, I wept over it, seeing that we, the city, were bolstered actually by our volunteers, supported by, working in partnership with, and it was possible to feel a sense of inspiration. And I continue to be totally inspired by our community and by the resilience of our Black, Indigenous, and people of color who continue to step out and volunteer and lead in their communities, and by everyone who has stepped forward. And I will stop there, but it has been one of the only places of, I'll stop right there, and I will ask another colleague to share their opinion about it. I'm certainly not the only one with an opinion. Thank you.
That's a great question. I'll just add a couple of points. One is that a lot of city staff are also volunteers. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of staff people, a lot who are doing their job for the city, but then also when they're not doing their job for their city, out volunteering in many, many different capacities in our community. So that is acknowledged, and that brings a very different perspective to our work then also. Around housing and homelessness, we keep hearing from neighborhood residents who are noticing that there are people experiencing unsheltered homelessness that are forming encampments, and one of the things that we hear the most about is we want to make sure that people have their basic needs met, and how can we contribute to that? And there are neighborhood residents who are bringing food, who are bringing water, who are raising funds to put in like sanitation services or porta potties, and so it is very inspiring, and to see that kind of that kind of community involvement and community residents coming together and working with city staff.
I just wanted to echo the comments of our Public Works Director. Myself and the building official and other staff were out on Hiawatha Lake the following Monday. And what was really striking was how clean the sidewalks in the streets were. It was a very odd juxtaposition. You'd go around the corner on 27th, and there was a very large pile of debris, restaurant equipment. And then you look to your left, and there was a table where everybody had stacked the shovels, the brooms, the rakes, lots of water available. Across from the Coliseum building, there was leftover handouts from people who had set up just an ad hoc food shelf, Pampers, things like this. I remember one poignant picture that I took was two small kids, snow shovels, with some Disney characters on them down on Chicagoland Lake next to the sidewalk. And it was just a very, in front of Hugo's book. It was very moving. And that actually made our job easier to go around and look at the properties and try to make assessments and just move about. And while we were there very early in the morning, and yet hundreds of people were lining up in the parking lot at Target from various different groups, just showing up. And it was very inspiring and actually made our work easier.